Okay, so today we're diving into a pretty wild time in U.S. trade under the Trump administration,
Yeah.
and their, uh, you could say interesting approach to tariffs. So if you've got that meeting coming up where trade policy is like
Yeah.
the main topic, this is your quick but hopefully insightful prep session.
I'll do my best.
All right, so we're basing this deep dive on a news article from the Associated Press,
Okay.
June 6th, 2019.
Got it.
And it's, well, let's just say it's a lot. It talks about President Trump considering slapping a 25% tariff on, well, basically everything coming from Canada and Mexico.
Everything.
Yeah, I mean, even oil. And here's the kicker. It wasn't just about, the usual economic stuff. Immigration and even fentanyl smuggling were part of the equation.
Wow. Okay, so right off the bat, this is definitely not your typical trade dispute.
Exactly. And to make things even more, well, let's say unique, the U.S. already had a 25% tariff on steel and 10% on aluminum imports from, those same countries.
Right. Those tariffs went into effect back in 2018. And the justification at the time was national security.
National security.
Yeah. The administration used something called Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962.
Okay.
It's a pretty obscure provision, but it basically gives the president a lot of leeway to impose tariffs if they decide that imports are a threat to national security.
So help me out here because I'm not sure I'd normally lump, immigration and drug trafficking in with, say, steel production during a war. Was that a common way to use Section 232?
Not really. It's usually invoked in situations where maybe a critical industry is considered vulnerable or, vital to national defense. Using it in this context was definitely a new interpretation, and it caused a lot of debate.
Okay, so let's get into the nuts and bolts here. We're talking about oil, big time. How much oil were we actually getting from Canada and Mexico back then?
A lot. We're talking almost 4.6 million barrels of oil a day from Canada and another 563,000 barrels a day from Mexico. So yeah, it was a pretty significant chunk of our daily consumption.
That's huge. And
Right.
President Trump was basically saying we could just walk away from all that.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
He was arguing that the U.S. didn't need those imports. He said we had enough oil and lumber here at home.
Okay.
But as those import numbers show, that wasn't really the whole picture.
So let's game this out for a minute.
Yeah.
If those tariffs actually happened, how do you think Canada and Mexico would have responded?
Well, historically speaking, when one country raises tariffs, the others tend to hit back with tariffs of their own.
Right.
And that can escalate pretty quickly into a full-blown trade war where, nobody really wins.
Yeah.
In this case, Canada and Mexico could have targeted U.S. exports, and that would have had a ripple effect on industries and jobs on, both sides of the border. And of course, it would have strained the already pretty complicated relationship between the three countries.
Definitely. And that kind of brings us to the human element of all this. What would these tariffs have meant for, everyday people, businesses, consumers?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, think about it. A tariff is basically a tax on imported goods.
Right.
So businesses that rely on those imports would have to pay more, and those costs usually get passed along to the consumer.
Yeah.
So we could have seen higher prices on everything from gas to, groceries, cars, you name it.
So it would have had a real impact on like household budgets and, just everyday life.
Exactly.
And speaking of, things having a ripple effect, the article also mentions fentanyl and China. How does that fit into this whole picture?
It's a good example of how complex global trade really is and how issues that seem completely unrelated can actually be, pretty intertwined. So while fentanyl is a problem here in North America, a lot of the chemicals used to make it actually come from China.
Okay, so to try to address the fentanyl issue, President Trump was thinking about tacking on another 10% tariff on those Chinese chemicals, right? On top of the tariffs that were already in place.
Exactly. It's like tariff stacking, and it can have a pretty big impact on global supply chains.
Yeah.
Like, imagine a U.S. company imports parts from China to make, whatever product they make here. Those parts might already have tariffs on them. And then if the chemicals used to make those parts are also hit with tariffs, the cost of production just keeps going up.
Right.
And then that can make U.S. products less competitive, which could lead to job losses or even companies moving production overseas.
So what I'm hearing is it's not just about the direct impact on, the specific products targeted by these tariffs. Yeah. It's really about like this whole web of global trade and how one action can have these unintended consequences.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
So we've covered the background of these proposed tariffs,
Yeah.
the potential economic and political fallout, and how it could have actually affected people's lives, it's a lot to process.
It is. And here's something to think about, as you go into that meeting. Given how connected these global supply chains are, how might tariffs like these affect, the availability and the price of things that seem totally unrelated to, oil or lumber or chemicals? It really highlights how interconnected everything is in our global economy.
Yeah. Okay. Food for thought.
Definitely.
Well, thanks for breaking all that down.
You bet. Anytime.